while we are doing this, the next panel is called The Unstoppable Revolution, Clean Tech and Responsible Energy. And as we have heard here, there is a great confidence that technology will help us to meet the goals of COP21. And in this panel, we will explore those opportunities. The panel will be led by Nick Mabey, who will help us to unravel the trends in this sector. And Nick is the Chief Executive and Founder Director of E3G, Third Generation Environmentalism, a leading European organization dedicated to accelerating the transition to low-carbon economy. And Nick leads the E3G's work on European climate change policy, climate diplomacy, and foreign policy, and the security implications of climate change. And before Nick came to or founded this organization, he was senior advisor to the UK Prime Minister's Office, as well as held senior positions in UK Foreign Service advising on climate. So please, Nick.
Thank you, and thank you for those who have remained behind to hear our discussion on Donald Trump, which of course we're going to take up from the previous panel, didn't quite manage to meet it. As I said, my name's Nick Mabey, and I'm here to chair this panel that has the slightly provocative title of The Unstoppable Revolution, Clean Tech and Responsible Energy. And I'll introduce the panelists in a second. But the focus of the discussion, some of which was slightly preempted by the previous discussion, but we'll get there, is how can we ensure we both develop and deploy the technologies we need to meet the Paris goals, which, just to remind people, are well below 2 degrees with a view to going to 1.5, which is a large change. I think we perhaps haven't had a strong enough discussion about what the change in the Paris goals means for technology. Perhaps we will pick that up. And just to frame how ambitious those goals are, we've got $90 trillion of deployable infrastructure over the next to 2030, all of which has to become consistent with those goals, has to be low carbon, efficient and resilient. We haven't talked a lot about resilience so far because it's going to last longer. So it's not just in the future we'll have clever technology, it's the things we're doing now. Meanwhile, we'll probably quadruple the global economy and grow the global population. And it really does require, especially developed countries, to be at pretty much net zero by the middle of the century, not 80%. It really is net zero. And there's controversy over whether that's achievable. Actually, we haven't discussed that so much. A lot of people out there say that's not deliverable. We've never changed the energy system that fast. What are the major technologies? We've had a bit of discussion about that. What's the balance between R&D and deployment? How many energy miracles do we need? Because the core issue is not just whether this is feasible. I don't think anybody says it's infeasible. It's how fast we're trying to do it. Because the timescale is not being set by how fast our social and economic and political systems like to change, but how to avoid disrupting the climate system. So it's an ecological timescale, not a human timescale. And that raises lots of issues. We can't just miss it and then do it again and succeed. If we miss the timescale, we don't solve the problem. And we're stuck with irreversible damage. And I think, again, so there is a cliff edge we're going towards, which we have to avoid. So the pressures to get this right is very strong. So to help us fathom how innovation deployment will help us deal with this daunting but inspiring, we've had a lot of inspiring so far task, we have 4 speakers from very different backgrounds who help us look into it. So on my right, Sandrine Dixson-Declève, an old friend who's now Chief Partnership Officer at the Sustainable Energy for All Coalition, previously worked in Brussels for CASL. Lisa Jacobson is on my left, who is the President of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. Eric Scotto is actually runs a company, which is nice to have someone who does things. Thank you. Is it AKUO is the right pronunciation? Energy? AKUO. Sorry, yes, it was difficult to win. And then on the other side from the European Commission, Dr. Jack Metthey, who's from the Research and Innovation Department in the European Commission. So we have kind of 1.25 hours. We're actually reasonably on time, more on time than I was expecting. I actually had a different number written down here for this session. And I want to maximise the interaction on the panel and with the audience. So I'm going to give people a nice initial question just to get things going. And then we'll have a panel discussion which will run for probably around 30 minutes, a bit longer. Then we'll open up for questions. And I really hope people will give relatively short answers because, as I say, I think the previous panel covered quite a lot of the ground. And it would be nice to do the interaction. So, and I told Sandrine I would ask her the first question because I know her best. So she gets to be in the hot seat, and I'll apologise later. But this is a scene setter really for all of you to kind of say. So, what for you has been the most important and perhaps surprising part of the clean technology revolution that's happened to date? And what areas are you looking to focus on going forward in terms of changing the way we use and transform the energy system?
So thanks, Nick. And maybe I could ask the organizers to put on the image that I have a couple of images just to show. But I think having worked in the energy and climate field now in Brussels for the last 25 years, both building relationships between the private sector and also governments and the United States and the EU, so having worked with the US EPA and exchanges with the European Commission on the fuel quality standard, for example, what I find interesting is that we tend to continue to make the same mistakes. And those mistakes are that we focus on innovation and we focus on predominantly investment in new technologies rather than breaking down barriers to access of those technologies, looking at new business models, because typically what happens is that whether it be here in Congress or in the European institutions, those that have access to policymakers are the dinosaurs in industry. They are the ones that are not bringing forward the new progressive thinking or business practices, but instead are the incumbents who want to hold on to business as usual. So I think my first lesson is that we haven't learned our lessons. My second lesson is now having moved from a more European and developed country framework to SE for All, where the goals are incredibly audacious, having been set up under SDG 7 and under the auspices in 2011 by Ban Ki-moon and Jim Kim, which was by 2030, we need to double energy efficiency globally. We need to double renewable access globally, and we need to ensure that we create a much larger access to energy. And I think the troubling bit there for me is a little bit what was linked to my earlier question, and I still don't think we have the image, or I don't know if we have the images, do we? The access question, 1.2 billion people do not have access to energy. And we did hear from our Colombian representative earlier that actually renewables has enabled us to leapfrog in certain communities where poor, in particular the poorest of the population, are starting to get access. But the problem is that the way in which our systems approach, and in particular in the area of energy, is formulated is that we always look at large-scale investment in infrastructure. Microgrids are not part of that investment for the moment, and community solutions tend to not be part of that solution either. And the access question also brings all kinds of health issues, gender issues, and other types of dimensions which are incredibly complex. So the complexity of the transition, I'm less worried about that within the context of developed economies. I'm more worried about how emerging economies, and in particular the poorest economies, can continue to grow and truly find those community-based solutions that will allow them actually to meet their goals, meet their greenhouse gas emission targets, meet their sustainable development targets, and be able to fully develop and create new, more wealthy communities within their economies.
Thanks so much. It's interesting. It's kind of beyond the innovation in business models, more to innovation in how we actually fund communities and going forward. But well, that's what I was going to come to you, Eric, and ask you what your views are. What surprised you, or if you want to comment on Sandrine's comments, that'd be...
Does it work? Yeah. I absolutely don't think is beyond. I think it's fully and completely linked. And I fully agree with you. We've been talking about what needs to be done. We need a lot of innovation, innovation, and so on. But I'd like to give you some just quick figures. Last Sunday, there was the result of a tender in Dubai, which participated all the major utilities in the world. They tried to participate to this tender. It was an 800 megawatt solar project. And all the major utilities in the world, they went and they respond to this tender. And the winner did a tender at $3 cents. $3. So what do we need to invest? We need to invest more in innovation, of course. But I have a good news for you. Technology is here today, and technology is already affordable. Affordable for large-scale projects like that, but also for non-interconnected projects. It's already affordable. We are specialists in developing renewable energy on islands. That's why I'm tan. Could make you laugh that we are doing that, but islands are representing more than 600 million people living on the intertropical zone on islands. Islands is countries like Indonesia. Indonesia want to have their people going from 40 million middle class and get to 100 million people middle class. For that, you need energy. It's 17,000 islands, 3,000 populated islands. How do we do that? Today, they are producing energy thanks to diesel. That's the most expensive of the most stupid way to produce electricity. In those islands, we have already developed, put in place projects where we're cutting by 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% the price of energy on those islands. And it's not tomorrow, it's today. Why can we do that? I got another good news for you. 4 years ago, there was a president of a small, tiny company, a Korean company called LG, came to see me 3 times in Paris to be sure that he will get part of my order for batteries. And at that time, he came with a PowerPoint presentation telling me, okay, if you buy the battery at that price today, and you put that in your tender, I promise that in 2020, I will sell you my battery at this price. Nice presentation and so on. Last year, we did another tender for some islands in the world. The price I did put on my tender for batteries was the price he was announcing to me in 2020. So it's not in 2020, it's already here. The day Elon Musk with Tesla announced his gigafactory for battery, he was not ready. He was marketing when he announced it. But the effect of that was a 30% decrease on the price of battery the day after, competition. So we have technology. This technology is affordable. So what I'm telling you is today. It's today and it works. And there is one point to finish, which is very important, is emerging markets. How do you want Africa to access to energy in the coming years? They are nearly 1 billion today. In 2040, there will be 2 billion. What do we do? Are we going to try to sell them the old model? So it's a question of model. This model is over. It's just simply over. There is no alternative for Africa to growth. And growth means access to health, access to education, access to a new agriculture not dependent on fossil fuel. Because our agriculture is fully dependent on fossil fuel from A to Z. So if we want to grow, to have growth in Africa, and it's a major problem for Europe now. We're facing the migrant problem, and the migrant problem is a real problem. We better finance renewable energy in Africa to help the growth of Africa instead of investing in security and defense in Europe to prevent the migrant to come. That's not the solution. The solution is renewable energy, and it works today. And I will show you some example after, if I have some more minutes.
So I'm going to move to Lisa, but just say, so the surprise for you was everything was cheaper earlier than everybody thought, which is a surprise to me. I must admit that was what I've been most surprised about. But Lisa, how does that?
Well, I mean, I think, just to tell you a little bit about who I'm representing, the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, we're a trade association. We're based here in Washington. We have a big focus on North America, but we also have many global companies. And we mainly focus on utilities and providers. So providers from supply side and demand side energy efficiency, the broad portfolio of renewables, and natural gas. So whether it be combined heat and power or direct use natural gas, what are the solution set that we have today that's affordable, readily available to meet our challenges? So the first point I would make is I completely agree with you, and it's not a one solution set, but we have so many technologies that are available today that are practical, affordable, reliable, and we're not doing enough with them. And it goes back to your point. We're not cracking the nut, and even in our own markets here in the United States, about overcoming the barriers and setting clear and predictable market investment frameworks to use what we have. But I think what I often hear, it's either the opening, this huge daunting challenge, and are we ever going to get there, or a vision of we have everything we need today, but what's going to fill that gap? We think it's data. We need to know better what actually we're doing and chronicling what you've just described and telling all participants, society, communities, the private sector, governments, what's actually happening based on facts. And right now we have some tremendous facts. And so my organization has made significant investments in chronicling the transformation, this revolution that's occurring, with a deep focus on the U.S. marketplace. And it's called the Sustainable Energy in America Fact Book. We commission it through Bloomberg New Energy Finance. It's all available for free, and it basically is the state of play on U.S. energy. And what we've looked at over the last 7 or 8 years, and I just hold it up to show you, this is what it looks like if you print it out, but you don't need to. It's all available online, is that in the United States, we've had this mix of policy, innovation in business models, technology costs coming down. We've had some unexpected rapid changes that couldn't have even been imagined just 5 or 10 years ago. And what we're showing based on that is significant emissions reductions. And for this year's report, what I found most important is the economic data we have, not just on these really rapid, fast-moving reductions in renewable energy technology or other technology areas. Obviously, natural gas in the U.S. market is a huge story in terms of its economics. But what it's doing big picture to U.S. energy productivity and what it's doing to wholesale and retail power prices in the country. We have not seen, as we are decarbonizing significantly, we are not seeing upticks in retail and wholesale power prices throughout the country. We looked at it by region, but across the board, we are not seeing that becoming greener is a burden to business or consumers. So this is really significant news because policymakers don't understand it. Many businesses don't understand it. And once they do, based on facts, they respond. So my last opening comment is really about what's happening in the corporate sector, and we can talk more about this. We basically have seen a doubling 2 years in a row in U.S. corporate purchasers of renewable energy. And why is that happening? I mean, you can say, yes, it's Google and Amazon, but it's not just them. It's across the board, and we chronicle that as well. Many different industry sectors are taking control of their power purchases because they see it as an economic and viable benefit to their businesses. And we've got to look more at further engagement of the business community. And I hope we'll talk a little bit about Paris, but that's one of the excitements of Paris, was the level of involvement of the business community. It's not going to be all of a sudden 1 year, it's every major Fortune 500 company, but every year we're incrementally expanding the band of engagement by significant investors in the energy sector and a significant number of economic actors globally.
Jack?
Yeah, well, I would subscribe to many of the things which have been said, but just to set the scene, and I was mentioning this to Nick at the beginning, what we're doing, we're trying to imagine a triangle. One vertex is the subsidies, the incentives, and we heard this figure of 200 billion a year to fossil fuels, and we need to shift this clearly. The other one is cost. I would not entirely buy, if you allow me the pun, the argument that it is fully affordable right now. I think, take photovoltaic, we still need to lower this cost. And this requires a lot of R&I, I'm certain. Then the third vertex is digital. And you emphasize very rightly that data, new business model will come from that digital revolution. I worked a lot for the mobile telephony and internet. In the mid-90s, we were nowhere. But 20 years later, we see a total radical change. So it means it can go relatively fast, and sometimes it's a process. We see the beginning, we don't know how fast it will go. But I would be rather optimistic. Now, this being said, we have a long way to go, because in terms of research and innovation investment, the energy sector is investing 0.3% of its turnover. Take pharmaceutical, it's 18%. Aerospace, it's 15%. So mission innovation in that respect is good news. We need that. Now, you have also the hard technologies, if you want, wind, solar, and the rest. But you have more systemic elements. Think of cities. Most people live in cities and consume energy in cities. There we're trying to develop things called nature-based solutions, which are different ways to live, to operate, to function in a city. Which leads me to say that it's not only on hard tech you need to invest attention, but also on the acceptance, on the models, and a number of societal parameters which are not necessarily entirely clear today. Not to mention the impact on some classes of population and some fairly specific geographical environments, be it in islands, be it in remote countries like India or Africa.
That's it. At some point we'll get back to that kind of broader social system innovation. But I want to just, C wants to pick up. We seem to, that's a bit of a contrast to the other panels. A lot of other panels, carbon pricing, innovation, focus. Here, a lot more about deployment, a lot more about there's lots of barriers to stuff we should be doing already. We all know there's lots of barriers to efficient energy efficiency, but also places where clean energy is a good business opportunity or consumer proposition right now. Why are there these different stories? We have a Bill Gates energy miracle story, and we have this, perhaps I'd say, the Bloomberg New Energy Finance story. Why are these different views of the world? Because they are sending very different messages to decision makers about what's possible. Sandrine.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that the irony is that you have actually the two sets of actors who spoke at different times, and typically they throw the ball back and forth. So we heard predominantly from the policymakers this morning, and the policymakers continuously speak about, except for yourself, speak about the need for more innovation and more technology. When you speak to businesses, and again, having just spoken to a series of different utilities who are trying to penetrate the African market with renewables, the barrier there is 30% VAT tax. It's not the fact that actually the markets aren't willing to take the renewables. It's the fact that there are taxation systems that are in place that are not enabling them to actually move forward. So I think the key is to bring everyone together, and that is what Paris did. Paris was able to amplify the voices of all of the policymakers and the different businesses, cities, and NGOs who were coming forward with solutions. That was the excitement of Paris. Now, as was said actually this morning by John Pershing, the key is that we now need to move from negotiations to action. And I think that is the most frightening. How do you then bring all those actors together and really design, co-create solutions that work? And I would come back to the point that it's the long-term policy making. It's the fact that, yes, in terms of the second phase, we absolutely need to put more money towards innovation, both by the private sector and the public sector, that we need to ensure that we have the right corridors for capital. So we need to bring the investors on board. we can't just talk about divestment. We have to talk about positive investment and create those positive investment strategies with investors to enable that to happen. So I think part of the problem is that you still have this distinct kind of throwing the ball back and forth, but the proper way of moving forward is very much what we saw in Paris and need to continue to do. We just have to amplify it because we don't have a lot of time. And the last point I'd make is the evidence building. I think there are two types of evidence building that we need. One is to amplify the stories and to make sure that we start benchmarking where we actually can see the progress. The other is to ensure that we see where we can have the biggest impact. And we've been putting together some heat maps in terms of both energy intensity and renewables and access. And the problem there is obviously very different countries will have the greatest impact depending on what you're looking at. But I think we need to start measuring, if we're really going to move forward as a community and want to get the right things out there, where are we going to have the greatest impact, and trying to collect as many actors together to have that impact.
Anybody else want to speak to this?
I fully agree. The thing is, as a corporate, as a company, the difference, there is people, the difference of approach is very simple. There is people talking, spending time lobbying, okay, and there is people on the ground. So when you say the cost, I disagree with you. The cost is needs to get done. Yeah, of course, costs need to get done. Okay, but it's already done. It's already done. You can see my invoice. I can show you how much I pay my panels. You know, to be honest with you, it's going to be very difficult to get lower. It's already very, very low. The main problem is financing. It's the shift in the financing. Why? Because we've been supporting fossil fuel, we've been supporting other systems for 70 years, 100 years. It's difficult to change. We cannot change like that. There is people making huge amount of money by distributing, by producing. It's a whole shift we need to do. Subsidies. Imagine how much subsidy we did put in oil, fossil fuel, coal, nuclear, and for how long we did it. Okay, if you look at what happened in Germany, if you take Germany, 20 years, less than 20 years, we cut the subsidies everywhere. In France, we already cut the subsidies. It's over, okay? We did support renewable for 10 years. When you see what we achieved in the last 10 years, this is just amazing. Can you imagine if we had been supported 30 years? that would be crazy. But it's not the route, it's not the path we're taking. So we have, as a renewable energy producer, we have to compete now. Next year, on solar, we'll be on the market, selling on the market in France. So it's no more subsidies. We're selling on the market in France. For Africa, the problem is very simple. It's a question of money. The question of money is a VAT, that's one thing, but it's also expectation of investors. It's a vicious circle. As an investor, you say, okay, this government is not reliable. I don't trust in this government, so I want a short-term return on my investment, 5 years. We're talking about infrastructure. We need time, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. So the problem is, because you're expecting a lot of money, a lot of return, okay, the cost is not the cost of equipment. It's the cost of financing, which is expensive. But let's think the other way around. Let's think that we're thinking long term. We're installing renewable energy in Africa. If you install renewable energy in Africa or Southeast Asia, in the islands and so on, you increasing the level, the standard of living of the people. They have education, they have health, they have access to food and so on. So you're creating trust into the country. Trust in the fact that you will get your electricity bill paid in the future. So what is the most important is to have a lower expectation on return on those countries, and then automatically we will solve the problem. And what I'm telling you is just practical. We just signed a 50 megawatts solar project with the government of Mali. with a price which is much lower than what they pay for fossil fuel today, with an expectation of return in the next 30 years. So we have to change our model, we have to change our expectation, we have to think more long-term, and I know it's very difficult for politicians to have a long-term policy and a long-term view. I know, they look at the next election. So as corporate, we need to be also socially responsible and to decrease our return short-term in order to impose this model for the next 30, 50 years in order to have a stronger territory, a stronger economy, and that is what I wanted to show you on the pictures, but it's very difficult for me to, I don't.
Yes, we can't see our pictures. So a summary there is the price of money is more, or at least important as the price of carbon in trying to get this out. Any other comments on this? I think we're coming into, we're in I must say, a panel which is pro-deployment and barrier busting at the moment, more so than magic innovation. But other comments again about how do we deal with this perception? There is a perception which came very strongly this morning that we need to have some miracle, some major innovations to get to net zero, and that's not what's being said on this panel. Why is that disconnect? I didn't feel the same excitement here about renewables on the previous panels. There is a disconnect in the emotion around this.
I think we need excitement. We need many things. And if that's exciting and that gets, the headlines, Bill Gates is talking about technology and energy and, obviously the contributions he's making in many other areas of development are very significant. So you may not agree with his orientation, but we need it all. And I think Secretary Moniz made that very clear. So I think what I'm trying to see in the corporate community is kind of that wake-up call. And it's not going to be, as I said before, a wake-up call that happens around Kyoto or happens around Copenhagen or happens around Paris. It's actually a growth of multiple wake-up calls until finally we are at a totally new space. And, so it's not going to be a one-shot wake-up call. But if that's a wake-up call for 2015, 2016, that Bill Gates is getting in this and he thinks it's important, he may be focusing on long-term R&D, and I'll compliment him on that. But it doesn't take away from the fact that we have so much and we need to utilize it. And there are other ambassadors for that message. So I don't see it damaging at all. I just think it's up to all of us to fill the space with what's actually happening right now and the accomplishments that we're making. So I'd give you another example. Around the Paris Agreement, there was, looking mostly at U.S.-oriented business activity, while some of these are clearly global companies. The administration tried to galvanize, over 100 very large multi-sector companies to take on new commitments and to get engaged in the conversation around climate change around Paris. And that was extremely successful and just, grew beyond their expectation. And then around the signing just last week or 2 weeks ago, week are we in, that group of companies plus more got in the game and publicly came out supporting implementation of Paris. So I think we are seeing shifts, and the shifts for the companies that are engaged there now are either using energy today or they're deploying energy today. So it's a very practical, real conversation. It's not about technologies that are going to be available in 20, 30, 40 years. It's about what's happening today. And I guess the last point I would make, you mentioned in the beginning net zero energy. And we have companies within our membership that have goals. These are, equipment manufacturers. These are industrials that are looking at the conversation about how they could be net zero energy. I would never have expected that 5, 10 years ago. And, one of them is here today, Kingspan Insulated Metal Panels. They're out of Ireland, global company in many different sectors. But the point is they are looking at that. I never would have anticipated that would be a conversation that companies would be contemplating.
Can I maybe build on that? Or would Jack like to build on it first?
Well, a bit of excitement on renewable, because really it's so important. Decarbonization is a key word here. The INDCs, we're currently decreasing by minus 1.5% per year. The INDCs would be equivalent to 3%. But meeting the 2 degrees would require 6%. So without renewable decarbonization, we simply don't get there. Now, some reasons for hope. when an anecdote, when flying from Europe yesterday, you leave the coast and you see these offshore wind farms, and it's there. Really, it's tangible. And a country like Denmark is producing, I guess, consuming 42% of its power consumption is from renewable. So it is feasible, but it requires a lot of investment, and there is a lot to say on financial engineering. That's true, fair point.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on Lisa's point, because having been on the board of We Mean Business and looking at the developments on the business side, I think what's really interesting is not just the suppliers of clean energy solutions, but actually the purchasers of clean energy solutions. And if you look at RE100, which was launched by We Mean Business and the Climate Group, this is a group of companies from across the globe that are promising to go 100% renewables. So I think what's really interesting is this dynamic. In the past, we were only talking about trying to make it easier for the suppliers of clean tech. Now we're actually bringing together the purchasers and the consumers and having real conversations about transformation moving towards net zero. So that is an excitement. The other key point I would make is and I didn't realize this actually, it's a brand new statistic that's come out in 2015, where renewables investments have topped in developing countries, much more actually than in developed regions. And I think that's a story to tell too, because we always talk about the usual suspects, the US, the European Union. We don't talk about Nairobi or Bangladesh, who are actually putting in place major changes and shifts in their energy systems. We're not talking also about the demand side management aspect, because it's not very sexy. But the major shifts that we're starting to see in energy efficiency and reduction of intensity and consumption. So I do think that we do obviously need to talk about these things, but I think we need to cage that less in just the innovation bit and commend ourselves at being where we are today and trying to say, okay, well, as we're already here now, the price of renewables has gone down phenomenally. We're seeing incredible progress in energy efficiency. How do we up our game? Not in the next 20 or 30 years so that we're net zero by 2050. How do we do it in the next 10 years? What is our timeline for the next 10 years? What do we want to see in the next 5 years? What are the most impactful areas?
I think we can give you some, because you're going to be very disappointed if we don't talk about the magic things, the magic innovation. I'm going to give you some magic innovation.
No magic.
Now, there's one thing. 5 years ago, the EDF, which is managing the grid in France, we were talking on islands. A huge island not huge, it's not big, but there is 1 million people living on this island in the Indian Ocean. It's called La Réunion. And they were saying, we cannot inject more than 20%, 25% renewable into the grid. You got to be damaging the grid, it's not going to work, and so on. So the magic things has been storage. First. Secondly, is the merging of energy, renewable energy, and internet, IT, access to information. That's the key. Okay, since then, we've been working with them, and we achieve already 43% renewable into the Réunion Island. But our target now is 100%, and we'll make it. We'll make it. So, big thing in innovation is storage, is have access to the energy when we need it. And what you were saying, of course, the most important is decrease our consumption. We're consuming too much in the north, okay, but we need to give access to the minimum consumption in the south, because they don't have access to energy.
I want to come back before we open up to the audience, just to try and bring together this issue about, we've been very supply side driven in the past, supply subsidies. Slightly disturbed by this conversation about models we had. We're talking about kind of models which are very kind of centralized, God in a computer basically, predicting what we're going to use in 2050. But what you're getting from here is that actually it's innovation drawn by consumers, business consumers, personal consumers, for lots of reasons. Low carbon, clean air, more convenient products, using a lot of different convergence of different technologies, and then some challenges of that. We know privacy is a challenge on some of these issues. We know that acceptance. So I just want to, but it would seem odd if that's the future we're in, that as we're thinking about 2050 plans, we're still relying on computers to tell us the future instead of trying to build it on this basis. So again, how would you like to see this conversation about the net zero plans going forward capture this bottom-up, consumer-led innovation and deployment, and it's got, lots of speakers talk about integration. It's not just about carbon, it's about building a balanced economy with lots of different pieces. Because that seems, again, to be where a lot of the energy is. But when we then fall back to discussing, we're going to do some modelling for 2050 about tonnes of carbon, which doesn't reflect that type of richness. So, again, just reflections on how do we capture that? And one of the innovation from the demand side is a very critical piece at the moment. In all innovation theory, we don't talk much about it in energy. And I might pick on Jack to start with, as you raised it in the early
but we call it prosumers.
Yeah, exactly.
Namely those people who are both users, consumers, and producers. And clearly we're at very interesting moments in history where we used to have very centralized models. You know the story, huge investment, cost of distribution, etc., etc. And we're shifting, we see, maybe sometime in parallel or in competition, more decentralized models. And the name of the game is to try to have the two coexist in the most efficient manner. But for that, you need social acceptance, you need real public authorities. I have a very bad lesson, for example, a very bad case in one country, and I will not name it, but Sandrine certainly knows the story. It was very fashionable to subsidize photovoltaics on roofs. So massive investment, but sometimes on very, very energy inefficient buildings. And it was kind of a fire and forget, because after 2-3 years, we were short of monies, the budget was in bad shape, they stopped, no maintenance, and the whole thing went, let's say, and you know what I mean. So this means you need to think about these things, to have a real plan, and to buy in also the people, to reach out to the people who are going to use and sustain.
Lisa, you work for...
Well, I mean, I think, I don't know, do I still need the mic or not? Oh, I can speak loudly. I think what you mentioned is something I've certainly seen in the marketplace with our members is much more of a systems approach where, our policies and people's thinking, might have just been on one technology 10 years ago. And now they're much more integrated in the marketplace. I mean, people always say, how does a coalition of natural gas, renewables, and efficiency get along? How do you, you're all competing, aren't you? And isn't it a zero-sum game? It actually isn't. They're much more integrated in the marketplace, which you probably know well, whether it be at the buildings level or a campus or a city or even a household. So to your point, we have to start with efficiency, to maximize and optimize our investments in other technologies. But we certainly see in the U.S. and see in the conversations around our business tables that the portfolio is what we need to emphasize. Again, not just one or two technologies, but have policies that enable kind of a fuel neutral approach, but that value the environmental attributes of technology and provide, a long running room for investment. And then efficiency, renewables, natural gas, storage, information technology can work together and get us to a better place. Trying to think about getting to the end of our goal is very hard if we don't get the first and second and third steps right. So I think it's appropriate to think about deployment and using what we have now, knowing that the more we use it, the more it will evolve and the less expensive it'll be.
One of the things we're doing a lot of work on using energy efficiency, classifying it as an infrastructure category, because it gets cheaper money, it sits on a different part of the budget, it gets different tax treatment, and also you then optimize demand and supply together, which currently doesn't happen. And that just, those mind shift changes, and then they have big changes to the systems we work inside.
I wanted to add another element which has been fascinating, and over the last 2 years, as you know, we've been having these what we call difficult conversations when I was working with the Prince of Wales Corporate Leaders Group. And the key focus there was to bring in energy intensives and to try to find, because obviously they are energy intensive, which means that they are a big consumer of energy, and to try to find where we could work with them in terms of their relationship within the energy system to, for example, on demand side solutions, to find times actually where during peak hours they wouldn't be demanding energy as much, but actually they would try to shift, and a variety of other solutions. And actually we found quite a few. And what was interesting was that the typical dynamic of energy intensive, so this is the steel sector, chemicals sector, cement sector, all of the big intensive manufacturing companies who have been pushing against stringent climate legislation, were starting to feel like they potentially could be part of the system. And I think that's fundamental, because again, we can't just talk about the energy system as those that are producing within the system. We need to figure out how we work with the consumers, whether it be the individuals, the citizens, or whether it be the large companies. And that has actually then brought up another key issue, which is some of them are just at the brink of finding breakthrough technologies that will actually fundamentally shift their energy demand by 50 to 75%, the paper industry. But they can't apply for funding in public funding structures because actually it's not geared towards them, it's geared towards energy providers. And so I think that we need to think about these things in terms of a real shift in the type of audience, actors, et cetera, that we bring on this journey, so that they feel that they're part of the journey and actually will also start to get some of the finance to fundamentally change into low-carbon companies.
If there's no more comments on it, questions from the floor now, please. There should be roving mics coming around. We've got one there, and then one in the corner. We'll take a group of three, if that's okay.
Well, it's not so much a question, but just a comment to the topic. Paul Bertram with Kingspan, and indeed we are part of the REI and have a net zero energy goal of 2020. Quite a challenge, but it's a corporate mandate, and we are also part of the DOE, U.S. Department of Energy's Better Plants program. You almost touched on it, but one of the ways that we're being encouraged not only to reduce our own energy intensity, but bring our supply chain into it. Yeah. So the market leaders are out there going to the chemical plants and going to the concrete people and saying, hey, this is important to us. We want to see this. How can you participate in this? So it can be driven from market leaders back through the supply chain, and it's having a ripple effect.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. So the microphone's just coming to you.
Okay. Oops. Okay. Karen Nelson with Demers Real Estate, Commercial Real Estate. One thing that I have found is that no one, and I don't know if this would be the Department of Energy, but there is no organization that has undertaken having town hall meetings with separate meetings for architects or developers or property owners, the end users, because it's the building engineer who's done things the same way for 35 years and is perfectly happy with that, who needs to get on board. The big companies like Walmart understand this. They're more than happy to put acres of solar on the roofs of their warehouses. But buildings, as we all know, consume tremendous amounts of energy, and no one has ever gone to them. The architects, I speak with architects on an almost daily basis. I have many of them who say, yeah, it's just all expensive and we know about lead-in, but this is a lot of work and I'm never going to talk the end user into it, and okay, let's just get on with the project. So someone needs to have the conversation, and I think town hall meetings might be a good idea. It could be in churches, could be in schools, wherever, giving the whole features and benefits and cost parameters and discussions. Here's why you want to do this, here's where you will eventually be, and here's why this is important. Anybody see that happening?
Yes, we do.
Actually, yes. There's exactly that. It's a very large-scale campaign that was started by Ed Masria, who's actually an American architect who has brought together architects not only in the U.S., but also in China. And he has a huge group of real estate developers, architects, engineers, et cetera, and they've signed a commitment, which means that they will actually not commission buildings that are not net zero. And I can send you that information. I have forgotten the name of the initiative. It's a phenomenal initiative, and we're trying to do the same thing in Europe now, very much around those grounds. But you're absolutely right that it needs to happen even more.
Small guys, though. There's the little local people in the Midwest who know.
Well, why
nothing
don't
about
you
this.
start a movement at the local level? Because, listen,
It's
I mean, this is something that I often say is that, you know, it's all up to us as well. It's so easy to always say, have you heard about this? Or how come people aren't doing this? Actually, we can catalyze these types of initiatives. And why not? Why not get a group of other real estate developers and architects together and start to have those conversations at a local level and get yourself online and talk to others and start catalyzing some type of movement around that? Because you're absolutely right. It is important.
But just so people might not know that Europe, all buildings in Europe from 2020 are meant to be net zero. And in the UK, it was meant to be 2016. But that was done by the Prime Minister convening all the heads of the large building companies and saying, why don't we, 10 years before, saying, why don't we do net zero? And they all agreed because they were slightly intimidated by the Prime Minister, and that forced their companies to actually push it down the supply chain. But they ended up doing cooperative R&D to solve that problem. That was a small town hall meeting, but a good one. In the corner there.
Thank you, Yami Daniel from the World Resource Institute. Thanks for the interventions. I didn't hear anything about endogenous knowledge. You have mentioned that, you know, innovation is not just hardware, but I wanted to know whether, and there's a mention in the Paris Agreement actually about endogenous knowledge. And I wanted to know how to catalyze that. That's been very a driver for pharmaceutical industries, for chemical industries, and why it cannot be a driver for innovation as well, for, you know, based on, in view of the challenges that we face. And the other issue strategically, how to bring capacity building in, because it's so much, it's like finance. You cannot have finance available, technology, if you cannot use it, if you do not really raise the workforce to really do this, you know, you're going so far. And as we're speaking about mid-century strategies, long-term capacity building needs to be part of the equation as well. I wanted to hear both, you know, the panel about endogenous knowledge and capacity building.
I'm not sure endogenous, the knowledge, the local knowledge.
Yeah.
You mean, no? Okay, I got an example for you, which will respond to both questions. It's all about education. So why local architects are not using that knowledge is because they've not been educated with that. So what we decided to do with our AKUO Foundation, we have a foundation, is to build bioclimatic schools in the world. And that comes to endogenous knowledge. For example, I'll give you an example of a school in Morocco. You know, they were spending a lot of energy. They didn't have energy, was expensive and so on. But the school was built with modern materials in the middle of a place where it's very hot in the summer and very cold in the winter. So we used the endogenous knowledge, and we had to find people all over the country which had still the skill to build the building in Morocco like it was done 100 years ago. And we built this school in, near Essaouira, near Oulan Merzoug, and this school is a zero consumption school. So we had to install some panels, but it was just done for computers and so on. For the rest, we don't need heat in the winter. We don't need aircon in the summer because it was built with the endogenous knowledge. So I wanted to tell you something because there was the mayor of Copenhagen, which we'll talk this afternoon here. Last year, we produced a movie which is called Tomorrow. It hasn't been released in the States yet, but we sold it in 30 countries. And we had millions of people went to see this movie. It's all over the planet right now. And I had a dinner with Al Gore, and I said to Al Gore, your movie was great, but you depress us so much. You know? That was a great movie because we understood something was going on. But so what? You know, you depress us. What do we do? So last year, we decided to do a movie which was just about solutions. Solutions. New model of agriculture, new model of energy, new model of democracy, new model in finance, and of course, new model in education. So I hope it will be on screen in the States. We showed a movie 3 weeks ago in the United Nations, and there were some people from the United Nations in New York. After that, they were tweeting, saying every single politician on this planet should go and run to see this movie. So I hope you will have a chance to see it. If not, DVD will be released in June, next June. It's called Tomorrow. And you'll see it's just simple solutions that are applicable today.
Yeah, I just wanted, on the indigenous solutions, fully agree with you. And I think that in particular, again, in developing and emerging economies, and specifically when you look at access, we really need to look at indigenous solutions. And so what we're going to try to do at SE for All as we really move into implementation is to bring forward capacity building possibilities, but also build ourselves on those very community and local types of solutions in order to ensure that they're scaled up and replicated in other villages and other communities. So part of that is storytelling. Part of it is amplifying and empowering leaders to then feel very proud with what they've been able to achieve in their local community and then be able to speak to other leaders and empower those leaders. The other thing that we'll be doing is brokering finance and partnerships. So going in again into countries and also to communities and try to assist those communities in getting the finance that they need for those projects, as well as the types of partnerships that will keep going on when we actually leave, because that's the key point. The final thing about demain in French, or tomorrow, the film, I would really encourage you to go and see the film. I went with my own daughter before I even met Eric today and didn't even realize that he was behind this film. And the reason why that film is so phenomenal is exactly for the reason that he indicated, which is it's all about what you were talking about, Nick. It's that vision. It's regular people. These are not Einsteins. These are lovely men and women who have decided to come up with solutions, have been able to amplify and replicate those solutions. And I think it's a really nice message also for our children, for the next generation, that they understand that this is not about being an astronaut. It's actually, or having to shoot for the stars. It's actually about very smart, but quite easy, simple solutions that we can all undertake to do the right thing. So that's just a little pitch.
Thank you very much.
And I have absolutely no money
many
engagement or anything.
Of the solutions, many of the solutions has been filmed in the States.
Yes.
There is many solutions in the movie coming from the States.
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to do also some promotion for the movie,
Well,
the Cannes
it's a
Festival
fan
is
zone.
going close. No, but it's really interesting talking about. I'm a firm believer in experiment, in demonstration. So you go to a country, local, you test possible solutions. Sometimes you have to fine tune, etc., etc. So you can prove it works. This is great. And then the crux of the matter is to be able to replicate, to deploy to the full region or country. And for that, you really need to have travail en profondeur, work in depth on public authorities, financing, education, because the worst thing is when you test something which works, but it's abandoned just because nobody becomes owner of it on a larger scale.
But that is a thing we focus on, which is innovation in how we learn and co-create together. Because if the real problem is pace, part of the pace is how do we learn from the cutting edge into the replication faster than we currently do. So, and that's a challenge I don't think is as mainstream. I don't think calling it capacity building, which always fills me with dread, to be honest, that phrase, it's the biggest turn-off. It's much worse than energy efficiency, which I love, because I'm a bit sad. But that, we need to find a better way of talking about it, because it's much more than, it's not me handing capacity to someone, it's how we build systems of co-learning and creation and innovation, which are much better. We have 25 minutes left, so a good chance for at least 2 more rounds of questions. So one over there, one here. I'm trying to look at bits of the room to be fair. So we'll start at the back over there.
Hi, Kirk Renault from BioBright. This is a question really out of left field and totally inappropriate for this panel, but I'll ask it anyway. Looking at the models, you see that technology is not really the biggest driver. The biggest driver is population. And I'm just curious what people are doing in Europe and here to do anything to slow down population growth, or is that something we're not allowed to talk about?
In the front here? Sorry, there's a microphone over here.
Here is the mayor of Copenhagen, which is living over there. He's a real star in the movie. I'm telling you.
My name is Brenda King, and I'm from the European Economic and Social Committee, and we are showcasing your movie as it happens on the 2nd of June, because I chair the Sustainable Development Observatory, so we're having an evening where we'll be showing the movie. So it's nice to meet you. It's to take a point that was made earlier by yourself, in that there's quite a bit going on, but it's small scale, it's by communities, and it's not always recognized by policymakers. Because we did a study across 6 communities in Europe, documenting what they are doing. And what they find is that they're reforms or policy changes that are coming in place for the reason that you said. The people who have the ear of policymakers tend to be dinosaurs, so they don't want change, that are affecting those small scale community-led projects. So I just wanted to find out from you, what can we do to get around that, especially as the Commission is represented here. And I have a couple of copies of that report here if anyone is interested. Thank you.
Is there one more question in this batch before I turn to the panel? Or are people questioning that? Okay.
Thank you. I'm Linda Yar from George Washington University. I really enjoyed hearing about the need for an integrated systems dynamic approach to these complex issues. But one issue that hasn't been articulated as such is income inequality, and the way in which certain pockets of poverty in this country, for example, can't capture those investments for improving housing stock and creating new jobs. How do we overcome that, huge barrier in this country, and I know, let alone on the global scale?
Okay, so who would like to capture any of those? Sandrine probably wants to start with the last one. You can do population again if you want to.
Oh, yay. First of all, I think really we have to. Yes, I think the whole population question, and I can't. Oh, there you go. I couldn't find the gentleman that had asked. Is a tricky one, and it's a poison chalice. And I don't think we can, from developed countries, dictate to developing countries that they need to keep their population in check. Let's also say that our own populations are decreasing substantially, actually, in developed countries. So there is a balancing effect. There are a variety of ways, however, that you can have those discussions. We've been having conversations with the Catholic Church, and that is more also on a sustainable development conversation, because population will decrease if poverty decreases. There are some very intertwined economic aspects regarding population growth. So let's just leave it at that, because I think otherwise it gets into some really deep moral issues that we don't want to look at. With regard to the communities aspect, what I often say is that those communities that somehow feel that they've done the right thing but somehow are disenfranchised is to find a champion. And that champion can either be a large manufacturing site, and there are a lot of companies that are really starting to change their way of looking at things, or a policymaker, or civil society leader, so I think the champion aspect. But the other is to link up with other communities and start to broaden the voice. So that is one suggestion. Much more needs to be done. Fully agree with you. And of course, the link between the cities, the communities, and then the national stance on sustainability or on energy is fundamental. And then the last point on income inequality. It's something that we've been talking about for a long time also in Europe. The purchasing power of different economies, even in Europe, is very different in the same way that it is here in States, not even to mention the different types of statuses of different people within the economy. And I think that is something that needs to be looked at in terms of access to renewables, as you indicated, but also energy efficiency, remodeling of homes, etc. And some communities are doing that much better than others, and we need to bring forward those examples to policymakers and remind them that this has to be a revolution across the economy and across the different citizens of the economy, and not just a solution for the wealthiest. And obviously you're getting some of this in California as well. As we know, Jerry Brown and the way in which he's actually been working in Oakland and other places to make renewables affordable for all parts of the community is really important. But it is absolutely an issue.
I'd like to for the others, broaden the question on community learning a bit longer, because I've worked on energy efficiency, urban planning things for years, and I still hear the same towns being referenced for models, and they haven't grown. And I've worked on smart cities for a long time, and I still hear about the same places, and they haven't grown. So there seems to be some types of innovation around these systems which find it very hard to scale up, despite being in the models and being talked about a lot. This seems to be quite a tough nut to crack. How are some of the ways we can do that? Because it's fine to say these things we can know they can work, but can we get them to scale fast enough? Back to our core question: what are some of the things we have to do differently? If anybody wants to.
Well, I feel like I keep repeating the same themes, but I think from where I sit, it's about corporate engagement. I mean, so we need leaders, and the leaders can be any class of leader. And I think I really appreciate your point: is that we're always talking, but we are as much in control of our destiny as any other person walking around Washington D.C. today. So it's not just a thought and a vision; it actually has to be an action that we're all taking. But I mean, in some of those cities, they don't have that mix of maybe at a point in time a political leader, a corporate leader, community activists, an educated workforce that's ready to move. I mean, I don't know what the recipe is, but it's usually not just one thing. When people had been talking about, okay, well, what drives corporates to change? The mantra used to be 5-10 years ago, well, it's coming from the top, and when it comes from the top, then therefore they do X, Y, and Z. I don't know if it's one element when you get into a community. It really, I think, has to be a mix of awareness and activated individuals in many different places that make a Minneapolis top of the list, or New York City and their programs mentioned, or a California, or any number of cities outside of the United States. So that would be my comment. And then the other thing is, we're on these panels and we're obviously of certain generation, but I think someone mentioned their family. I mean, my kids have a totally different view of what's possible, and their education system is preparing them for a conversation on energy, which I certainly didn't get in elementary or secondary school. So I think we are not really factoring in the youth. And it's not even just, the very youngest, but those that are just entering the workforce and what they need. I mean, I think they're probably far ahead of some of the conversations today.
Oh, yeah. That's for sure. No, that's quite interesting, because during the COP21, in the same time in Paris, there was that the largest city meeting. I can't remember if it was 100 major cities in the world or more than that. And what is interesting is I feel like there is a kind of competition now. So before, during 10 years, 20 years, it was always a German city, which was Freiburg.
Yeah, Freiburg,
okay.
Always won.
Come to Freiburg,
Yeah.
So we all went to Freiburg. But now I feel like there is a strong competition starting. It's a bit stupid, but I think it's great. I think it's great because they want to be the greenest, largest city in the world, and it's getting consistent right now. So I'm very optimistic on that side too.
I would be optimistic because in the digital age you have better social networking, more transparency, and these are two ingredients which are important in this particular chemical reaction which happens in communities. But competition is not bad, actually.
Competition, and the fact that when you live in a city today and you have pollution and you have so much disorder, I feel like we are at a point where we cannot continue like that. Beijing, Shanghai, Paris, this is awful to live in Paris right now. It's a beautiful city, but you can imagine the air pollution and so on. So we are at the stage that we've been waiting for the last moment. And as you said, the new generation, in my company, the average is 26, 27 years old. They think completely differently. So as a corporate, you have to integrate that. And as a mayor of a city today, you have to integrate that. People are not satisfied. People are not happy. So they're looking for a major change. And it's happening. It's happening in many cities.
The good news in the States, you have more millennials than baby boomers now.
Yeah.
So mentalities should evolve, hopefully.
I just want to come back to the income inequality thing, just to give you a story of, because my organisation ran a campaign in the UK for the last 4 years, which to hit a rift in our movement, because for 15 years the energy poverty community and the environment community had hated each other, because the environment community wanted to raise fuel prices, and the fuel poverty community thought they wanted to lower fuel prices. And we ended up, and the children's charities and the old age charities, we have the worst housing stock in Europe, virtually in the UK, and thousands of people die unnecessarily every year from cold in not a very cold country, many more than in Sweden and Norway, for example, because we have rubbish housing stock. It was built in the Industrial Revolution, lots of it, or for regulations. So we brought them together and said, well, instead of arguing, why don't we just campaign to super insulate every single house, starting with the fuel poor. So we'll use that market, which is socially subsidised, to build the supply chains and get the costs down and build the skills to do the people who can afford it later on and phase it in. We won some of the battles, some of the other battles, but we built 200 organisations from corporates to NGOs in the children's sector, in the poverty sector, in the environment sector, in finance, who had never worked together before. And the kind of momentum's carrying forward over the formal campaign stuff. So again, I think this is it. You can build the solutions, especially if you change the problem from that old one of price up versus price down, which was killing us and nothing was happening, to something which is about, no, let's solve the problem. And we solve that by producing warm, decent, low CO2 housing. And that was a way forward. We've got a chance. I've got flashing. Oh, they've cut 5 minutes off. Oh, actually, 10 minutes off in one go.
Okay.
So there's one question. I get one question or one comment from the panel.
I wanted
to add something. Did you notice that on news, on TV, on the news, it's always sad thing. You never see positive things. And when you talk to journalists, they tell you, it's because the people, they just want to see sad things. They are not interested in positive. I think we can change that. And if we start to give a voice to the people which are every day doing something that's very small, but which is so important for the community, we'll change the story, we change the model. And I'm not an utopist. Huh? My company is not a non-profit company. We're making a lot of money, I tell you. Non-profit is our NGO, is our foundation. So we can make money, we can create jobs. But we need support. We need the policymaker to see that the people are willing to see such solution on screen or everywhere. You know.
Well, we seem to be in closing remarks. Sorry, Sandrine.
Yeah, well, if we're going to do closing remarks, then I would.
They changed the numbers, so.
Yeah, so obviously, let's do closing remarks. So I would like all of us to envisage, and our goal is in the next 10 years, we need to fundamentally change things. So at SE for All, we're all pretty nervous, okay? Let's just be very clear. But with great leaders and enlightened leaders like we have here in this room and elsewhere, we're hoping that we're going to get there. But if you could see, so we are 2016 by 2026, where actually more kids, we've cut the access of 1.2 billion down to, let's say, 500,000, and even then I would like to go much further, where we actually have kids that can fundamentally do their homework at night, mothers that can give birth without actually having to hold something in order to see what they're doing, whether it's giving birth or actually cooking a meal. So from the access perspective, we have to fundamentally shift things in the next 10 years. But I think everywhere else, all of those green zones, community projects popping up everywhere, where actually people not only are proud to be reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but are living better quality lives. Because they're in better buildings, they're in healthier environments, they can walk places, and therefore we've eliminated part of the obesity problem. There are so many positive knockoff effects from this revolution that we need to talk about. And I fundamentally believe that we've got to get media to start talking about it. We need to start talking about it. They need to start featuring it, because you're right, every single editor and their grandmother says that this just doesn't sell. Well, I'm sorry, but I actually think people don't read anymore the newspaper and look at the news on TV because they feel that it's all negative. So we've got to transform the dialogue and ensure that it's much more positive.
Yeah, we seem to be very social in this panel.
Yeah,
the social factor.
Move from energy miracles.
But my question remains 2 degrees. Are we moving fast enough? Because in the Arctic, for example, ice is melting very rapidly, far too rapidly. And the atmospheric conditions are already changing in Europe. So the question is, are we ready to pay more to bring a solution fast enough? And that's a question which is addressed to everybody, public authorities, but also the audience, citizens. And that's a major political challenge.
I think related to that is just, I think there, in certain demographic segments, at least in the United States, there's this feeling of entitlement. You know, we are entitled to infrastructure without having to invest in it. We're entitled to a good education system without putting effort into it. And that's, I think, the success of a lot of our cultural dynamics, but it also is, I think, the biggest curse we have now, is that if we don't invest in any aspect of our community or our economy, it's not going to deliver for us. So energy is no different. You know, it's very difficult to get not even the scale that we need, but, you know, basic energy infrastructure, not even addressing climate as a whole. Maybe it's addressing just grid modernization or other upgrades we need. When you go around the country and you sit in and listen to the commissioners that are making those decisions, it's a very difficult discussion, very similar to what you talked about. If it's increasing costs, well, we definitely can't do it. Even if that means that we won't have reliable and affordable power in 5 years, we're just not going to do it today. And so I think we have to encourage and get active in terms of investing across our economy, and certainly investing in our energy and power sector infrastructure.
Thank you very much. I think it was a really interesting, and in some ways contrast for the discussion this morning, which was perhaps very much about pricing and carbon markets and models, to a discussion here which was on the right, can we go fast enough as societies? And I think we all agree we can technologically. We have the money, but can we get it to the right places as being a core thing at the right price of capital? But how do we tap into these other bottom-up forces of change? Well, not that bottom-up, large cities, corporates, people, communities, and fold that into the other conversation. Because I think that, from what I take away from this, is we need to think, as we think about our mid-century plans, the phrase of the day, how we bring all of that other way of thinking about the world, the integrated benefits, the different ways of looking at things, into the climate discussion. Because I think it'll make the climate challenge look easier, that pace look easier. At the moment, we seem to make it a little bit hard for ourselves by looking at it as a bit of an engineering problem, instead of thinking of a societal transformation. Where's the Bill Gates investing in the societal transformation as opposed to the kit? That would be, you know, if someone is here with a few billion who wants to do it, that would be perhaps a parallel and complementary mission social innovation, which we could run, because it just seems to me that's where a lot of the progress can be. Thank you very much to the panel. We are at zero. They keep on taking time off, so I'm just lost count.
Zero.
Net zero. It's time for lunch. Can you please give your appreciation to the panel?
Thank you to the panel, and it was a fantastic panel, I think, and really inspiring. So I hope you will now have a nice and inspiring discussion over lunch about opportunities rather than anything else.